Guidelines for the consideration of governing bodies in adopting a code of conduct for the learners. The Department of Education, Notice 776 of 1998, Ministry of Education, Introduction. Section 8 of the South African Schools Act provides that the governing body of a public school must adopt a code of conduct. The code of conduct must aim at establishing a disciplinary and purposeful environment and facilitate effective education and learning in schools. The Code of Conduct must be subject to the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa, 1996, the South African Schools Act, 1996, and the provincial legislation. It must reflect the constitutional democracy, human rights, and transparent communication which underpin South African society. The Code of Conduct must inform the learners of the way in which they should conduct themselves at school in preparation for their conduct and safety in civil society. It must set a standard of moral behavior for learners and equip them with the expertise, knowledge, and skills they would be expected to advance as wealthy as responsible citizens. It must promote the civic responsibilities of the school, and it must develop a leadership. The main focus of the Code of Conduct must be positive discipline. It must not be punitive and punishment-oriented, but it facilitates the construction of learning. Each school must develop its own code of conduct. In formulating a code of conduct as a consensus document and before adopting it, the governing body must involve the parents, the learners, educators, and non-educators at that school. After the adoption of the code of conduct, each stakeholder must receive the copy thereof. The above stakeholders must also be consulted when the code of conduct is reviewed annually or any amendments are made. The purpose of a code of conduct is to promote positive discipline, self-discipline, and exemplary conduct, as the learners learn by observation and experience. All key stakeholders should be committed to the code of conduct, despite it being directed specifically at learners. The code of conduct must suit the development of the learners and be appropriate to the different school levels. The language used must be easily understandable to make the content accessible. The format must be user-friendly. The Code of Conduct must contain a set of moral values, norms, and principles which the school community should uphold. However, the Code of Conduct is only enforceable against learners, no other person. The Code of Conduct should clarify promote the rules and responsibilities of various stakeholders in the creation of a proper learning environment in schools. The Code of Conduct should contain the components discussed below, which aim at providing appropriate mechanisms and avenues for stakeholders to air their grievances and also provide for legitimate disciplinary measures. The preamble of the Code of Conduct. The preamble to a code of conduct should contain the principles, philosophy, and ethos contained in the preamble to the South African Schools Act. Reference to be made to the fact that while the state has the obligation to make education available and accessible, this must be complemented by the commitments and acceptance of responsibility by other partners in education, learners, educators, and parents. The preamble should direct the code of conduct towards a culture of reconciliation, teaching and learning, and mutual respect, and the establishment of a culture of tolerance and peace in all schools. The legal authority for the control and discipline of learners. In terms of Section 3N of the National Education Policy Act, Act 27 of 1996, the Minister of Education must determine national education policy for control and discipline of learners at educational institutions. This policy shall be directed at the advancement of protection of the fundamental rights of every person guaranteed in the Bill of Rights, in the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa, 1996, Act number 108 of 1996. The South African Schools Act, Act number 84 of 1996, Section 81, empowers a governing body of a school to maintain a discipline in a school. The Code of Conduct must prescribe behavior that respect for the rights of learners and educators. The Code of Conduct of a public school must be displayed at the school and as far as possible be given to each learner in the official language of teaching of the learner when he or she enrolls at a school. As the learners are compelled to comply with the Code of Conduct of the school they attend, they must be informed about its content, which must, at least in positive terms, the things learners may not do or should do, as well as communication channels, grievance procedurals, and due process in conducting a fair hearing. Learners must understand that action may be taken against them if they contravene the Code of Conduct. When action is taken against the learners, they should be informed why their conduct is considered as a misbehavior or misconduct and why they are to be disciplined or punished. The punishment must suit the offense. Nothing shall exempt a learner from complying with the Code of Conduct of the school. An educator at a school shall have the same rights as a parent to control and discipline the learner according to the Code of Conduct during the time the learner is in attendance at the school, any classroom, school function or school excursion or school-related activities. The principal or educator, upon reasonable suspicion, sufficient information, has the legal authority to conduct a search of any learner or property in possession of the learner for a dangerous weapon, firearm, drugs, or harmful dangerous substance, stolen property, or pornographic material brought onto the school property. A search may be performed in terms of the following acts of general application: control of access to public premises and Vehicle Act, 1985, Act number 53 of 1985, Drugs and Drug Trafficking, Act 140 of 1992, Arms and Ammunition Act 1969, Act number 75 of 1969. During a search, human dignity shall be observed, and learners shall be searched in private by persons of their own gender, preferably in the presence of at least one another person. A record must be kept for the search, proceedings, and outcome. A learner who falls pregnant may not be prevented from attending school. A pregnant girl may be referred to the hospital school for the pregnant girls. Principles and values, the rights of learners, democracy. The Bill of Rights in the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa, Act 108 of 1996, enshrines the rights of all people and affirms the democratic values of human dignity, equality, and freedom. The school must protect, promote, and fulfill the rights identified in the Bill of Rights. All learners and partners at a school have the democratic right to due process and to participate in decision-making about matters affecting them at the school. They also have the right to have their views heard about these matters. Non-discrimination and equality. No person may unfairly discriminate against a learner. All learners shall enjoy equal treatment before the law and shall receive equal protection and benefits of the law. Privacy, respect, and dignity. Every learner has inherent dignity and has the right to have his or her dignity respected. That implies mutual respect, including respect for one another's convictions and cultural traditions. Every learner also has a right to privacy, which includes the right not to have his or her person or property searched or his or her possession seized. However, the principal or an educator may search a learner based on his or her reasonable suspicion, followed by the use of such methods that are reasonable in scope. Non-violence and the freedom and security of a person. Every learner has the right not to be treated or punished in a cruel, inhuman, or degrading manner, Corporal punishment has been abolished. Educators and learners have to learn the importance of mediation and cooperation, to seek and negotiate non-violent solutions to conflict and differences, and to make use of due process of law. Learners have the right not to be locked up in a solitary confinement or detention. The philosophy of the disciplinary system is based on a human dignity and on respect and consideration for others, and not on fear or assault. Freedom of expression and right to demonstrate and present petitions. Freedom of expression is more than freedom of speech. The freedom of expression includes the right to seek, hear, read, and wear. The freedom of expression is extended to forms of outward expression as seen in clothing, selection, and hairstyles. However, learners' right to enjoy freedom of expression are not absolute. Vulgar words, insubordination, and insult are not protected speech. When the expression leads to a material and substantial disruption on school operations, activities, or any rights of others, this right can be limited as the disruption of schools is unacceptable. Learners have the right to agreed procedures with the governing body for expressing and resolving school-related grievances, including due process, a method of appeal, and a right to assemble peacefully on the school property at a time and place designated by the principal. Problems or issues should, as far as possible, be resolved at the school. However, the disruption of schools is unacceptable. Environment. School environment. Learners have the right to a clean and safe environment that is conducive to education, security of property, well cared for school facilities, school furniture and equipment, and clean toilet facilities, water and a green environment, absence of harassment in attending classes and writing tests and examinations, all create an atmosphere that is conducive for education and training. Education. The Constitution enshrines the right of everyone to education and to further education, which the state must make progressively available and accessible. The South African Schools Act provides that education is compulsory for learners from the year in which such learners reach the age of 7 years until the last school day of the year in which such learners turn 15 years, or the 9th grade, whichever comes first. It also makes provision for due process before a learner may be removed or expelled from the school. Therefore, in a case of expulsion, the head of department must find a school place for an expelled learners who's of school-going age. In cases of suspension and expulsion, placement is an alternative school setting. For an example, reassignment to another class, correctional education under supervision after school hours, a special school for learners with behavioral disorders, and so forth are options which could be considered in conjunction with a school psychologist or a social worker. Suspension with the intent to expel a learner is part of a process to be decided by the head of department. The governing body may suspend a learner as a punitive measure if due process has been followed. Education and learning can be successful if the learners are committed to self-development, education and learning, and the educators are dedicated to education and teaching. The right to education includes the right to attend all classes, to learn and to be taught in all approved subjects, to be informed regularly about the school progress, to make use of all school facilities, and to have the potential of all learners fully developed. Rights and responsibilities of learners. School and classroom rules. School rules are designed to regulate the general organization of the school and the relationship between the principal, educators, and learners. Classroom rules are designed to give effect specifically to the relationship between educators and learners in the classroom and may include classroom interactions and management. Learners must be involved in formulation of school and classroom rules and must conform to such rules. All rules are to be consistent with the overall code of conduct, be clear and understandable, and make provision for fair warning. Each learner should be provided with a copy of the school rules at the beginning of each year. Younger learners at the primary school should be informed verbally of school rules. Classroom rules should be posted in the classroom. The consequence for breaking the rules should also be included. The punishment must fit the offense and be graded to make provision for repeated offenses. These rules should make provision for fundamental fairness and fair warning, and learners must be expected to know and to adhere to school and classroom rules. Ignorance of these rules is not an acceptable excuse. Learning and school. Learners must commit themselves to do their schoolwork during classes, complete assigned homework, and catch up on the work missed because of absence. Disruption of schools is unacceptable. Security and care of school property. As the school has been developed for the use of the learners attending the school, it is the privilege and obligation of every learner to protect and carefully use all the facilities and equipment so that others that come after them can also enjoy the privilege. The parent or legal guardian of anyone who intentionally misuses, damages, or defaces at school properties should replace it or pay for the property so damaged. Destruction of property is a punishable offense. School attendance. The right of learners to basic education places the obligation on them to attend school regularly during school hours. Should a learner be absent, his or her parent or legal guardian must notify the school to explain the absence. Learners have the responsibility to learn and develop their full potential. That is, academic, occupational, social, sport, spiritual, art, and cultural potential. They should actively participate in the learning process and decision-making and have the opportunity to talk about their problems. Learners can expect educators to maintain a high standard of professional ethics and to be present to teach their classes, assist them with their learning difficulties, report on their progress, and to look after their well-being. There should be a relationship of mutual trust and respect between the learners and educators. Victimization of the one by the other is unacceptable. The Learner Representative Council should represent the interests and views of learners within the school. They should also promote the proper conduct of learners, but do not have the authority or right to punish other learners. A school may establish a lesson mechanism between learners and educators. Responsibilities of parents with respect to the code of conduct. The ultimate responsibility for learners' behavior rests with their parents or guardians. It is expected that parents will support the school and require learners to observe all school rules and regulations and accept responsibility for any misbehavior on their part and take an active interest in their children's schoolwork and make it possible for the children to complete assigned homework. Parents should attend the meetings that the governing body convenes for them. Parents have the right to take legal action against any educator, learner, or a person who unlawfully violates the constitutional rights of their children by, for an example, corporal punishment, injury to a child, and so forth. Discipline. Discipline must be maintained in the school and in the classroom to ensure that education of the learners proceed without disruptive behavior and offenses. Its goal is to teach and lead the learners to self-discipline. The disciplinary process must be expeditious, fair, just, corrective, consistent, and educative. Where possible, the parents should be involved in a correction of the learner's behavior. Learners should be protected from abuse by adult or other learners. Restraint is the act of controlling the actions of the learners when such action may inflict harm to others or to the learner or violate the rights of others, learners, or educators. Educators may use reasonable measures where necessary to prevent a learner from harming himself or herself. The South African Schools Act 1996 empowers school authorities to discipline learners, but it is beyond the law to delegate this authority to fellow learners. Learners are partners with other members of the school and are not in charge of the school. Every educator is responsible for discipline at times at the school and at related activities. Educators have full authority and responsibility to correct the behavior of learners whenever such correction is necessary at the school. Serious misconduct must be referred to the principal of the school. However, a mechanism must be created at schools to handle disciplinary problems to reduce the load of the principal. Any corrective measures or disciplinary action must be commensurate with the offense or infraction. Corrective measures may become more severe with the subsequent repeated infractions. Suspension or expulsion may follow. Learners should not think that they cannot be suspended or expelled simply because it is their first offense or infraction of a rule or a policy, but such decisions must be taken by the right authority. In cases where learners cannot adjust to the school and where his or her behavior is objectionable, in that it violates the rights of others, he or she will be referred to the principal through consultation with his or her educators and the site of learning-based team in consultation with the parents or guardians. Every effort should be made to assist him or her to adjust. This would include referral to the Educational Support Service for treatment. If all these efforts fail, the principal will refer the matter to the governing body, which may make a decision in the best interest of the learner and the other learners at the school. Punishment. Punishment is a corrective measure or a penalty inflicted on an offender who has to suffer the consequence for misconduct in order to maintain the orderly society of the school. Corporal punishment shall not be administered. Dispute resolution. Educators and the disciplinarians must resolve disciplinary problems which are not serious enough to be referred to the principal. A license mechanism or objective and impartial adjudicator between the learners and educators should be set up to resolve disputes. In cases where learners are involved in gangs, the principal should not confront them, but the governing body should set up a negotiation mechanism. Educators, for example, deal with learners, but also with the principal of the school, colleagues, parents, and educational authorities. We call all these parties role players in education. When the relationship between these different role players breaks down, for whatever reason may be, we require legal rules such as the acts and regulations to help us take the necessary and acceptable corrective actions. In determining the placement of a learner with special education needs, the head of department and the principal must take into account the rights and wishes of the parents of such learner. An application of the admission of a learner to a public school must be made to the education department in a manner determined by the head of department. If an application in terms of subsection 7 is refused, the head of department must inform the parent in writing for such a refusal and the reason thereof. Any learner or a parent of a learner who has been refused admission to public schools may appeal against the decision to the member of Executive Council. Prevention, proactive advice, counseling, penalties, and corrective measures. In case of minor offenses, corrective measures may be applied. These measures could include one or more of the following: verbal warning or written reprimand by the educator or a principal, suspension, supervised schoolwork that will contribute to the learner's progress at the school, the improvement of the school environment, provided that the parents are timely informed and the security of the child is assured. performing tasks that would assist the offended person, agreed affordable compensation, replacement of a damaged property, and suspension from school activities, for an example, sport, cultural activities, and so on. Suspension should only be considered after every effort has been made to correct the behavior of the learner. Suspension and expulsion. A governing body, after a fair hearing, can suspend any learner who has been found guilty of contravening stipulations of the Code of Conduct for a period of 1 week or for a reasonable period not exceeding 1 week, pending a decision by the head of department on the recommendation of the governing body as to whether or not the learner is to be expelled from the school. A learner who has been expelled or his or her parent may appeal against the decision of the head of department to the member of executive council within 7 days of the decision to expel him or her. In cases of disciplinary transfer, the head of department must find a school place for a learner until the learner is beyond compulsory school-going age, as the right of a learner to basic education cannot be violated. All decisions leading to suspension or expulsion must take cognizance of applicable laws. That, for an example, a learner whose parent is unable to pay the school fees determined by the governing body may not be suspended from classes or expelled from the school. Admission to public schools. Section 5.1 states that a public school must admit learners and fulfill their educational requirements without discriminating unfairly in any way. Section 5.2 specifically prohibits the governing body of a school from administering tests related to the admission of learners and from authorizing the principal or any other person from administering such tests. In the line with the fact that it is a learner's right to attend school, he or she cannot be refused admission to a public school because the parent is unable or unwilling to pay the school fees determined by the governing body, does not subscribe to the mission statement of the school, has refused to release the school from liability for damages arising out of the education of the learner. There may be no discrimination against these learners. It is the responsibility of the parent to pay the school fees, and this is therefore an issue between the parents and the governing body. Remember, the learners do have a right to basic education according to the Constitution. I thank you.